Following that chaos, growing calls on Capitol Hill to impeach President Trump. Jordan Sekulow is the executive director of the American Center for Law and Justice and a Newsmax contributor. He also served as legal counsel in the president's first impeachment trial. Good to see you back. A lot to talk about with what's happening with the House. I want to get your reaction, though, to this. News that just broke here, coming in now, that the Supreme Court has declined to expedite another Trump campaign request to fast-track lawsuits regarding disputes in a few battleground states. Your reaction to that?
I'm not surprised. I think the Supreme Court, after that Texas case, has made it very clear that they do not believe they play a role in determining these cases, and specifically are not going to get involved. And so they're not going to fast track these two cases specifically. So it's not a shock to me at this point that those two cases are not getting the fast track.
It seems as if, and again, from what you're saying, that the Supreme Court has taken their stance on where they would play a role by not playing a role, essentially. So what does that mean for the Trump campaign lawsuits at this point?
I think the president's statement was very clear that he fought all the way, and that after the Electoral College vote was certified, the fight to change anything like that was over. And it moves on to another day and another election cycle, and whatever the president decides ultimately to do in the future. So I think he made that clear as well. So that these weren't lawsuits brought by the Trump campaign or the RNC, and in fact the president himself has acknowledged that the fight was fought in every way possible, and I can attest to that as well. But that once those votes were certified by Congress, that was the end of that. The legal challenges and his challenges to the outcome, whether or not he believed that it was the right outcome or that there was wrongdoing.
You're switching gears now. Let's talk impeachment. Your father played a huge role in the first one that this country went through with President Trump impeached in the House, not the Senate. And then you have this happening now. Listen to what Congressman James Clyburn had to say about a second impeachment on CNN. This was yesterday, and then we'll get your reaction.
Well, I think they will be drawn up or finished on tomorrow. It may be Tuesday before we really get them to the floor. You see, because it's privileged, it can go directly to the floor, and it may not go through the regular, what we call regular order, through maybe the Judiciary Committee. So it may be Tuesday or Wednesday before an action is taken, but I think it will be taken this week.
Help us to understand, because for folks that are watching at home, they may be confused because inauguration is next week. The President Trump will leave office. President-elect President-elect Joe Biden will step in at this point. How do we understand what's going to happen here?
Well, and what we're hearing now from folks like Clyburn is that they will offer this ability for the vice president who is not going to do it to use the 25th Amendment to remove the president. So if they don't do that, then they'll introduce these articles of impeachment. I believe they've got the votes in the House to do that. And then it will go to the Senate, but the Senate's not back in session until January 19th. Unless all of the senators agreed to come back into session, that won't happen. So you're talking about an impeachment trial of a former president who was impeached by the House while in office, but then would be tried after he was in office. There is a legal question there about whether or not that is constitutional or not. And I think there's also just a question for the country and for Joe Biden. I mean, they're talking about saying, well, let's wait 100 days so that Joe Biden can get his, get his cabinet confirmed, basically, get off the ground running. And then we're going to go back as a country and relitigate this. I think that, again, regardless of what side you're on, if you think the president should be impeached, if you think the president should be censured, if you think the trial should happen, quickly, but that's not going to be the case. The truth is that this would be horrendous for the country. And I'm not sure why Joe Biden is not putting more pressure on Nancy Pelosi in the House to say, you know what, move forward with something like a censure. It probably would pass the Senate, doesn't need a supermajority. But going through an impeachment 100 days into my term, I get that you're trying to let me set up my cabinet, but at the same time, you're making Donald Trump the issue still. And that's not good for an incoming new president to still have the country's focus on the former president, who still has a tremendous amount of support in the country.
Not to mention, it's not cheap to even move forward with something like that as well. So
everything stops too. Everything, this all business. I mean, talking about COVID and getting out the vaccine, all of the business of the Senate stops once they start that trial. And I've been part of those trials, and that is all they do. They can't leave the floor. They are stuck in Washington. They cannot debate other legislative issues, other problems that arise. So again, I know Nancy Pelosi is dead set on this impeachment and then hoping to get a conviction. Remember, at that point, they would still need 17 Republicans to get to 2/3, to get to 67. And that is a tall order. I think especially tall when you're talking about doing it 100 days out.
The argument that you watch on news is on other media outlets is that they want to get President Trump out of office as quickly as possible. It's just not a likely concept. So if the goal of impeachment would be to have a removal of a sitting president, obviously that's not going to happen come January 20th. So what would be the underlying goal of the second impeachment, realistically?
The main goal is that they can prevent him. One of the things you can do when you impeach is you can also decide as the Senate not to allow that individual to seek public office again. So prevent him from potentially running for president again. And there is another debate about whether or not that provision requires a 2/3 vote or not. Now, certainly you can't get to that unless you impeach and convict. So you still have got to get the 17 Republicans. But if you do, then there's a question about whether or not it's just a majority vote to then take away their ability to run for office in the future. I think, and Nancy Pelosi said, that is a driving factor in why they're moving forward with impeachment when they know that the president's already going to be leaving. It's that they want to prevent him from ever seeking public office, which would likely be the presidency again and likely be in the next election cycle. So he'd be starting back up in a campaign if he decided to do that in 2 years.
Yeah, you can already see the media headlines now, and the driving force of what the story will be it could be a while to come following what would happen with this potential second impeachment. There's also this media angle of this and how they're covering it, using words like this.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is just utterly devastated. After one of the darkest days in our nation's history, a coup attempt, no longer bloodless, instigated by the President of the United States.
Coup attempt. I want that word to just sit with you. What do you make of that, especially in light of everything we've learned about Russiagate, a coup attempt?
Yeah, I think that, again, a lot of this, when you look at the rhetoric and you look at the speech the president gave specifically, now remember, the standards that the House and the Senate use on impeachment are not legal standards. Under legal standards, I don't think there's any way there's incitement to violence or anything there in an actual court of law. But that's not what you're in when you're dealing with, and trust me, at all, when you're dealing with the House, of course, deciding to impeach, and then the Senate trial. They decide because it's what high crimes and misdemeanors are. So but the idea that he was responsible, and we're ignoring what has gone on during his entire 4 years. It started off even before he took office, was spying on his administration. We know that. Then we know the Russia hoax. Then when we had to deal with, as I was on that Mueller team, that investigation, which amounted to nothing. The president was vindicated. And then an impeachment based on a phone call with a foreign leader that 35 or 40 other people were listening to that also failed in the U.S. Senate. So you've been kind of stoking the fire, if you will, from the left the entire presidency. That doesn't excuse at all any acts of violence, and all of those people should be held fully accountable for what they have done. It was horrible to see. But I think that's why it's why we all should take a step back on this impeachment move too, because if this is an impeachment move that really is looking forward to saying we're going to impeach this week while it's real hot and in the news, but then try him in 100 days and bring all this back, I'd be very concerned for the country. And I think there is a question is even if you were someone who is just bent on impeaching this president, think about the bigger picture. Think about your country, think about your nation and the division that will cause. And especially if we continue, think about it, it's already been a very long election cycle. Add another 100 days to that, another 100 days of turmoil in the country. We don't need that while we're dealing with COVID and trying to get the vaccine out and trying to get people back to work and businesses and schools back open.
Well, I'll leave it right there. Out of time with you. Always good to see you. I appreciate you weighing in. That is Jordan Sekulow. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thanks, Sean.